Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of how to paint Sepsimus the Plaguesworn. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of how to do this. So the first part we looked at the skin and came up really nice. It's not finished yet, but we've got our base and our glazes and all of our little colours and some highlight in there. We can come back and do our final touches and all of the Nurgle's fun bits right at the end, like we did for the last tutorial on the Blight King. So, but now we're really getting into the armour, and what this tutorial is really all about is focusing on playing around with some pale armour and treating it a bit like flesh. So we're going to use some of the ways in which we've built and glazed colours into the flesh, and we're going to try a similar idea on the armour. But we're going to be starting from a different base to give us some contrast. So with this flesh, we've got a lot of, there is a lot of purple there and so on, but there's a lot of red in that, okay, a lot of magenta. And so the contrasting color, green, so we're going to be building the pale armor from a green base, which is going to be a very, I guess, dead flesh tone, but that works for Nurgle. You know, green's one of their favorite colors, so we want to build from a green, build up to some sort of pale tone. So we've got some of my usual suspects here that I've used in previous tutorials. So the green we're going to be using is the turquoise. This also, complements, because this is, my own figure. I use a lot of this turquoise on other figures, so it's going to help tie the rest together. And so I'm going to be using turquoise, but you could use any green that you like. And then we've got the corpse pale here. And the reason why I've chosen this again is because this color has a little bit of yellow in it, more so than other pale tones. So, and it's a little bit warm as well, I guess. And so that, and there's a bit of red in there as well, but there's some yellow in here, so that should work to balance out the turquoise. If I used something that has too much red in it, like let's say I've got another color here from Game Color, this one, see, that's probably not going to work because that's got way too much red in it. So these are going to clash, and what happens when you put contrasting colors together is they neutralize and they go gray. So that's still cool for like a dead flesh, but you're going to get a very muddied finish. So what we want is something that will stand on its own next to that color, and so something with more yellow in it, like this has, should blend and help give us I guess a transition that won't deaden out and will actually look a bit vibrant. So that's why we're going for the corpse pale, but you could use another color as long as it's got a little bit of more yellow than red in it, then that will help mix with the turquoise. And then we've got our gray for just for controlling saturation if we want to make it a little bit desaturated. And then I threw this color in just because this could make for a nice highlight. I'm not sure yet whether we'll use this, but I've thrown that in. It's a very soft lemon color that might work really well. And then obviously white again. And then now for the glazing, we won't be doing the glazing today, but I've put them out there so we can see. So we've got the usual ones again. So we've got the blue, the purple, the magenta, and the yellow, like we've done on the last episode and also on the Blight King tutorial. So we're going to use a lot of that, but I've also thrown the green in here as well. So the difference with glazing this armor as flesh going from a green base is that we can't really use, as I've just said, we can't really use the magenta too much because it's going to deaden it all out. So the predominant colors we'll be using will be the blue and the purple mostly, with some yellow and maybe a bit of the green. And then we're going to pick very key areas for the red. So where we want to shift it or knock the green back, we'll throw a little bit of red in there. But I've got a way to get around this, and because this model has a lot of separation and separate areas, we should be able to get the red in there. We're just going to have to be tricky about it. And the last part of this is that in the previous tutorials we've been doing a lot of layering and highlighting. For this one, or line highlighting, for this one to get the base down, we're going to use a little bit of wet blending. And the reason for that is it's going to give us a lot of texture, a lot of variation, and we're going to be doing a lot of little sort of stippling and little lines and little dots and things to help give the impression that this surface isn't exactly even and might be something like a flesh-like material, possibly. So yeah, we're going to be doing a little bit of that to give us the transition from green to pale color, and then we're going to come back in and do some, like, you know, refinements and highlights and so on. And the other thing we're going to be doing is looking at how we're going to separate this out with our colors. And the way we're going to do that is, so looking at this, we want to draw the attention to the focal area here. So we've got this really nice separation here of the Nurgle mark to the armor. So that's definitely going to be a different color, so we get some attention drawn. Then we want to draw the eye up and around in this sort of central area. So I think the plan will be, we've got our green pale armor, and then these little areas, these two areas here, that little disc and that, I think we're going to do that as pale flesh, like the flesh tone on the body. So that's where we're going to get our reds, and that's going to complement and contrast with the pale green around it. And we have a nice deep furrow here where we can separate that out, so we get the red and the green, and it'll draw your eye up into here, and we've got a little bit of it there in the neck. And then the other way we're gonna contrast this is we're gonna have that pale tin metal that I used on the last tutorial. We're gonna do that again here on the weapon, but also bring it across onto this this raised part on the shoulder pad, and then most probably we'll use that on this courgette, I think it's called. Is that what that is? The thing around his neck, because that's separate as well, and that's going to separate the pale greens from the red there and give us a bit more higher contrast in this area. And then finally some dark sort of black horns on this, so you should get some really strong separations and the bronze color up here on that top knot. So we should end up with something that has a lot of variety here, and so your eye is going to be drawn to that, both from the red-green contrast and also the dark to light complements. And the tin is going to have a bit of that red in it as well. So hopefully that should work, and we should end up with some nice things. Then obviously you got the metals down here, and we'll have probably like a scarlet red cloth, something like that, which will be good to contrast. And then obviously, you know, all the other little bits and pieces, we'll do those too. So that's the game plan, and it's always good to think about that before you start when you're trying something a little bit more tricky. It all sounds very complicated, but trust me, it'll be fine. We'll work it out. So the main thing is not to when you're using complementary colors, to be careful when you're layering them on top of each other. As I said, they go grey. So unless you want that, which we will want in certain places. So it's all about being particular about how you attack it. So I'll stop waffling on now, and we will get the palette set up, get your model ready. I'm going to lay out the green and corpse pale tones, and then we're going to go through wet blending and just doing a little bit. And today, obviously, I'm not going to attack the whole armor for you here in one go. We're going to focus on this belly area, and I'm going to build that up, and I'll show you that at the end. And then off camera for next week, I'll go through and do the rest of the armor plates and so on, so we're ready for the glazing and so on next week. But yeah, we're not going to do every single piece in this particular tutorial because that's not really necessary. You just need to see how to build it, and then you can go away and try that yourself and work it out. And you might have a different game plan for how you want to break this up or do a pale color. But yeah, that's pretty much, I think, how we'll attack it today. So I'll get set up and I'll be back in a second. All right, so the first part is we want to make our tones like I've done before. All you want to do is find your base, and to begin with we want to do a thin base coat, much like we did on the flesh, just to push the base away from that black and give us something with color to work on, so that when we do our wet blending over the top, if we miss areas or it's not quite even, we still have some kind of color showing through underneath, and that will help give us a smoother finish for the wet blending, so we don't have to redo the wet blending many times or lots of glazes. We're still trying to be efficient here and still trying to do something that's within a I guess an approach that's more for tabletop than a showpiece. Even though this whole thing sounds quite technical, the process is I'm still trying to make sure we keep that to a a reasonable level. We're not trying to go overboard here. Just like with the flesh, there was only a few layers and a highlight. Same with this, we're just doing a few steps to achieve a result. So one way we can do that is by making sure we have a good base. So to start with, we just draw this across. At the moment this is very bright, so we want to add a little bit of that grey in to desaturate that down, because that's going to be too much for what we want. We want something a little bit yeah, not quite as vibrant as that. We can add that later with our glazes. We can build that back up again. So we're just adding this in, and this grey here has a lot of yellow in it, so that's actually really good because that's going to mix well with the green, and we'll end up with something cool. So possibly something around this. We'll just keep building that down until we find the color that feels about right. And yeah, and then we want to start adding in a small amount of the corpse pale just to lift it. Okay, we're starting to see possibly the color we're going to start with somewhere in here, maybe a bit more vibrancy in that. And we just keep playing with it till we find a color. What I'm trying to look for is something that still hints at this type of really nice green, but without it dominating and being too far apart. Like these colors are slightly desaturated as well, so I'm trying to find something that's close to them and looking at that there to see what will kind of mix well. So I think we've got something close. So let's now build our tones. So we grab a little bit more of this, pop it here, and then just gently mix that in until we find our gradient. Now, even though we're wet blending and we're not going to be doing a lot of layering, we still want to do this just to find out where we really want to be, because we might decide that we want to start a little lighter, or we'll already have the color there, and that's really great. So you just want to set this up, because this will help us for highlights and so on later as well. So we just keep doing that, and we're starting to see something that looks pretty good, and it's starting to transition into this sort of pale, slightly yellow pink color without it deadening out. Okay, and we just keep doing that, adding a little bit more in, and now we're starting to see that yellow come through. So that's our transition, and then pretty much the full color here, which would be like the highlight or the final, and then we can even go further. So most of these layers that you're seeing here, as I said, is going to be in the wet blend, and then we'll be doing line highlights and stuff coming up here with these lighter tones. Yeah, and the reason we're going a little bit brighter again, like before, when you're glazing, it's going to pull the tones back towards the middle, and you're going to lose that brightest bright. So we want to go a little lighter than we normally would to make sure that we get the full range of tones, and that's what glazing needs. You need to have a variety of tones in order to allow those colors and those glazes to actually work correctly. Otherwise it won't work. So we've got now our range, which I think is pretty good. We've got somewhere where we can work, and we're going to use this tone here to do our first base, and we're going to water it down quite heavily so it's not too strong. We just want to get away from the black. So yeah, let's do that now. And so we grab our model, grab your water, pop it on the side here, and we're just going to just knock this down to a pretty watery consistency. A couple of drops in there. Okay, something around about that is alright. Maybe a little bit more of that green in there. We'll just see how this goes on. We might have to darken it a bit, so we'll just try here on the side. Yep, that's in focus. And no, that's looking pretty good. I think we should be fine. Again, we're going to be painting over this, so it's not that big of a deal, but we want it dark enough to be somewhere close to the dark tone that we're going to use, and thin enough to where we're still allowing a little bit of that zenithal to show through and a little bit of the black to show through, just to it's going to just create a few variations in consistency across the surface, which is good. Because as I said before, we're going to come in and do some little streaky patterns and so on across the surface to simulate the idea that this might be ribbed or have some sort of, you know, maybe like rhino hide or elephant hide where it's got sort of cracks and and furrows in the surface of it, a little bit like skin. And that's going to really help make this sell the idea that this might be something otherworldly and crazy and very very chaosy, right? We're going for something very classic here. This sort of, you know, vibrant colors and crazy variations of colors is something that you'll find a lot when you're looking at like early 90s, like 80s, 90s White Dwarves and army books. And if you have a look at what the way that they approach it, yeah, it's just a whole different idea. They weren't as afraid to to push, you know, those kinds of ideas back then. Not to say they're not now, but it's a wonderful resource. You know, if you're just wanting to get yourself inspired, go back and take a look at those things, and it will give you lots of ideas for your chaos stuff to make it more interesting, I guess. So let's take a look. So yeah, this is the type of thing we're trying to get to. So I'm going to go through and basically just paint all those areas that I said in the beginning that we're going to be looking at doing this pale tone on. And once that's all ready, then we'll come into the wet blending idea, and I'll go through that with you. All right, be back in a sec. All right, so now we're ready to go for the wet blending. So as you can see already, it's starting to, you know, look like something. We're starting to see the separations. We can see, you know, how it's going to evolve, and it's going to help let your eye rest and understand what's happening. If we'd left it all black and just did it independently with each section, it's going to be very confusing. So this is going to help. So now let's get into a bit of wet blending. So with wet blending, basically what you're doing is you're applying a slightly thicker consistency of paint, not as watered down as you'd normally do, and you're going to put paint each color in that will meet but not overlap, so sort of next to each other. And then what you're going to do is you then wipe off the paint off your brush, and then with the damp brush you gently feather and basically do back and forth motions between the two colors, and they'll then blend together. But you do need it slightly thicker, otherwise it's going to dry before you get a chance to mix the colors. So we've got our brush in one hand. It's kind of, you want to take it one section at a time. So, and you're probably going to go over it a few times, and we're going to go back and forth, but I'll show you here just on this section so we can see. So hopefully this will work okay. I think the consistency is all right. So basically you're gonna get it in focus. So we just sort of paint that in like that, okay, and then wipe the brush off, and then while it's still wet we grab our other color here, and we're gonna just paint that in a little bit there. Well, that's probably going to be too watery, but we'll try it anyway. And then we're just going to blend that down. No, it's going to be too watery. Here we go. Just get that thicker paint there. There we go. And then basically all it is just gently feathering just bringing them back and forth until you're happy with the blend. Bringing that in. Okay. And as I said, we're probably going to go back over this a few times, and it's alright to get a little streaky, but you get the idea. So we're just gently manipulating that, and we'll do a few coats to get like the bright to dark, and you're basically treating each surface from where the light's hitting above, and so and then going down into the recess to get that kind of shading. So that's the sort of idea. And then what we'll do is we'll come back and reapply and so on. So we'll try the other side now. And I'm being pretty light with this, not as heavy-handed, because we are going to use some layering and so on as well. On the smaller plates, obviously, you're not going to be able to do this type of technique effectively, because it's just not going to be viable. So you will have to do the layering and use our tones that we've established in this line to you know, to get your dark to lights. So that's just a thing. So we're just softening that in. Might have been a bit too much water there. Okay, so but we can see it better there. That's a better blend. So once that's all dry, I'll go through and just do this now, and then we'll come back and do another layer and build this up until we see more of this cream color base. We want it about maybe about to there all the way around. So I'll go away and do that now, and we'll come back in a second. All right, so let's take a look at the first layer. So basically it's a process of going back and forward, and so sometimes instead of just feathering in between, you'll come back in with like, so you have a bit of your dark there, okay, and it's wet, and you'll come in with your light, this sort of off corpse pale, and then you'll gently feather that in, and it'll start to get, you can see down here, it'll go that mid-tone, and you just keep feathering it in. And what I've been trying to do is do little streak motions and patterns through it, and hatch it and feather it out, and so you can see the best results there. It's starting to create like almost like a painterly approach. So you're not always going to be cleaning the brush between the movements, only in that first establishing step to get your gradient, and then after that you're coming back in, adding a bit of the dark into the base, coming in with your, you know, with thicker consistencies of this, building it in a little bit off, and then gently feathering that into where the wet areas are, and either going up or down depending on whether it darkens or lightens, and then coming back in with a bit more light, and then slowly, so focusing on that lighter tone towards the top, and then coming down and around. And so we're just going to keep slowly building this until we see a nice gradient like this with little tiny feathered little marks, you know, and it doesn't have to be super smooth in terms of surface, because we're trying to make this feel like something that it's not. So we don't necessarily want to have you know, your normal transitions of like layered color on armor, like you'll see, like let's say on a Space Marine or something like that. We're not trying to simulate that. And then finally, so when we come to like things like where there are two armor panels here, so we'll obviously have to do a more of a layer highlight approach across something like this, but you'll probably want to come back in with your dark, and we'll put a little shadow in under there just to separate those two out, so we have the light hitting there, and then it's going to go dark and then light again, and so on. And that's how we're going to be working up and stepping up each of these areas. So that's the kind of thing, and we can come back in as many times as we like and slowly play with that until you get a finish that you want. And basically you want to see these lights here, and so we're going to, let's show how to highlight that. So you come in with your corpse pale here, and again slightly thicker paint this time, just slightly off color there like that, so it's like a light minty tone, tiny bit of water. So this is where we're then moving into not as much wet blending, but now we're just doing little tiny highlights and feathered out motions, so just to build. So you're incorporating now one of those little tiny areas where you see little bumps, grooves. You can like accentuate that and make it more of a feature of that panel. And so now we're just layering up that patchwork, and so it gets that really nice, you know, just a yeah, I don't know how else to describe it, a painterly look. And when we add all of our glazes on, we're going to have a nice variety of little things going on there, where we can add, you know, little bits of that glaze and that color to either deepen or lighten, and so on. And so you'll end up with something really interesting. And so that's basically the idea, is you're just playing with that, and then as you've established enough that you like, then you come in with more and more, you know, normal consistencies of paint, layering and highlighting the edges, and sort of just joining things together so that there's not too much of a weird difference between everything, and then you'll end up with something. So for instance, here it's looking a little bit faded, so that's where you want to come in with your off highlight here, this sort of limey tone, and just slowly bring down that light, but always remembering that the light's coming from above, and so you don't want to totally ruin the effect of that gradient that we've established with our tone. We just want to just connect the dots a little bit, as it were, and just create little feathered streaks and grimes, a little bit like with my Blight Kings tutorial, a little bit like that. We're just building it in, and so that you're getting that nice layered approach there. So I'll just reset up some of this color here, and then we're going to try attacking the tops and the bottoms just to bring it together, and we'll take a look at it, and then we might do a final little highlight around, and then we should be good. Alright, I'll be back in a sec. Alright, so now we're going to do more of a line highlight. So I just cleaned up underneath just to clean that line, so it's a bit easier to read. When we do the glazes, obviously we're going to put shadows and so on, but I just want to clean that up so it's easier to see, and that's something, you know, it's a personal thing, but it makes it easier for the next steps. So now for this, it's more of I said as before, more of a layered approach. So we'll just bring these two tones together and create something of a mid-tone, and this is more normal consistency for your paint. And we'll just get it in focus, and we'll just bring that across the top there. Okay, and come in here. If you can get away with a little bit of that wet blending, then do it, because obviously we want to try to have the surface is consistent across as much of it as possible. But where you've got areas that are a little bit too difficult, it's obviously not always going to be an option. And trying to maintain those patterns and that streaking is what you're looking for. So just come in there, and then maybe just bring in, you know, little streaked patterns. Across the edges. And this is just one of those things where you're going to play around and go back and forth until you find the level that you like. But we are trying to, I guess, get a more stark difference from the Corpse Power color to the green, so that we're not like, the gradient's quite a quick change. You know, we're getting quite a stark difference. It's a much more, you know, if you were just doing normal layered approaches to this, the difference would be a lot harder to get, and what you'd end up with is like just all being super pale limey, or it'll be like too green. You won't get that, like, you know, one color to the next kind of thing that we've got going on at the moment. And that's, I guess, the advantage of doing a wet blend like this. You're going to get a very quick change and going quite bright, which is good, because that's going to help those glazes find, you know, those tones to change and shift. Just bring that in a little bit more there. Okay, and you know, that's just part of the fun of this. You know, you're just mucking around, trying to establish something cool, and yeah, and just find those little shapes and forms, and just treating the surface as almost like a blank canvas, so that you're just creating it like a little picture on the surface here. Even if you don't consider yourself, you know, particularly artistic or creative, you'll be surprised. You can find some really fun little things here, and you're just playing, and so that's pretty much the idea. So I'll go away now and I'll do the other one down the bottom. So the highlight would be across the top and the shadow underneath, and I'll just give that a bit of a clean, and then we'll do a final highlight with some of this brighter tone here just to pop off all the edges, and then we should be pretty much done. All right, I'll be back in a sec. All right, so once we've gotten something that we like this, the next step now is to just do a final highlight to build this out so that the glazes don't knock back this all too dull, and then we'll have to go back and reapply everything, so we don't want that. So we're going to use some of this light little lemony color here, pop it off to the side with a smaller brush, so I'll be using like a 0 or something like that, because we're just doing nice little, and then just bring it in to that tone, and so you're getting a little bit of an off color. We don't want it quite as bright as that, but we do want it to be bright enough, and a little bit of the other color in there just to help tie it all together. So this is your normal kind of line highlighting, so a nice point on the brush, and we're just going to pick off all of the raised areas, and any little marks. If you want to create little scratches or things like that, we can put some shadows in there as well later on, and you can create little chips and marks in the surface, like little cuts, like as if this has been scored, or it has old wounds that we could then bruise up and use purples and blues to create little scars and so on the surface, rather than sort of chip marks from that you would see in metal. So there's a few really nice things that we can do to get the sensation or the feeling that this might be something not totally inorganic or lifeless. It might have a demon bound inside of it. There could be any number of reasons why this armor is the way it is, and so we're just going to go through here and pick out all of these little areas with this color and give ourselves that little bit of extra brightness. Even these little studs that are on here, we want to pick those out. And I think something that will be really fun to do with these studs is to definitely put some nice bruisey, sore tones around them, maybe make them very yellow, almost like pustules, and have little drips coming down from them and that sort of thing. That'll be really lovely, and help reinforce that notion that this is a very sickly, something very wrong happening with this guy. There's, he definitely needs to go see a doctor. He's not having the best day, or he might be having a great day. It depends on your point of view, right? So yeah, we're just coming through. I'm just using the fine edge of my brush and just highlighting those edges and just giving a little bit more brightness. When you come in here, you're just going to run it across the top edge. You could do the bottom edge too if you like on some of those areas. It's okay to bring some of that traditional line edge highlighting back in. You could even run a little bit more light, a line edge highlight across there as well, which I'll probably do in places. You can dot it a little bit, you can do little streaks. Just work with the sensations or the feeling that's going on with your brush marks. So that wet blending has given us a lot of randomness in the surface, and you want to keep that going. You don't want to deaden it out and lose it. So we are attempting a bit of roughness here too, but by doing these really fine, sharp, nice highlights, it's tricking the eye back into thinking that this is a little bit more of a perfect finish. And you're basically reining in that chaos and giving a little bit of order there. It's very heretical for a chaos worshipper to talk about order, but you want a little bit of that coming through so that it does give your eye somewhere to rest and somewhere to understand where the parameters of that color is going and where it's shifting. So I'm just going to go and clean that up a little bit, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. And so then in the future we'll be going through and doing the rest. Well, I'll be doing that and then coming back and showing you the finished product next week for all about glazing and so on. Alright, I'll be back soon. Alright, and there we go. So let's take a look. So that's it, we're all good. So we've done the extra highlight on those edges there. We've got some lovely little flutters of interest there from the brush marks on the surface in that blend. We've got the little line edge highlights. There's a lot there that's going to work with our glazes when we finish off, and that means we can now go on and do each of the next panels and so on across the whole model and get everything working together, which is a really good place to be. Now, unfortunately, with this camera, it's a little bit more washed out than what it really is. It's a little bit deeper in color, a little bit more green, and a little bit more yellow, light yellow, and that contrast is a bit nicer. It's a little bit washed out here, but otherwise it's very close to what you'll get. And yeah, that should be pretty good to look over the whole thing. It's going to look nice. If you look at the top there, it's nice and bright on the top, and then underneath it's very dark. Yeah, if you can imagine that on the rest of it, it's going to look pretty good. So I'm going to go through this week and attempt to get most of it done. If not, we'll be continuing on with the armor, which is probably, I guess, probably a good thing as well, because this is sort of something that takes a bit of practice, and luckily we have a lot of little panels here that we can play around with that and get some practice. So I may just bring you back in for another go at this, because, you know, really 20-30 minutes or whatever, 40 minutes isn't enough time really to spend, you know, digging into this technique and getting it to a nice point. So I may end up, you know, bringing you back in, but I'll see how we go depending on how my week goes. I'll either get that to this point, we'll do glazing, or we'll continue with this. Yeah, so otherwise I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this has been informative and helpful to you, and you know, maybe pushed you into some unknown territory that might be a little bit scary at first, but I promise you it will all work out in the end, and the Chaos Gods will be happy with you. So yeah, please hit that like button, subscribe, and all that kind of stuff if you liked this, and I'll leave you an overview and a better picture of it at the end with the recipe and that, if you want to actually attempt this. But otherwise, yeah, I guess I'll catch you on the next one.